I'd like to welcome each of you here this evening. This evening as we begin this celebration of 150 years. 150 years ago, God began a good work here at County Road 35 and 36. Today, as I was thinking about 150 years ago, and I couldn't really imagine what was going on at that time, but it was during 1863 that Lincoln wrote the Proclamation of, how do you say that? Emancipation Proclamation. And it was passed into law in August. The year that this began was really at the very height and climax of the Civil War. In November of that year, Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. During this year was the first year that there was a U.S. newspaper. It was the Boston Morning Journal. It was the year that they began having free mail service in 49 cities. And it was the year that Congress authorized that the tracks for the Union Pacific Railroad would be 4 feet, 8½ inches wide. A lot of stuff going on that year. I think it is hard for us to imagine what the vision was of the persons who planted this church here for God's honor and God's glory. As I thought about this, I thought of Paul's prayer, the ending of his prayer in Ephesians, when he says, "Now all glory be to God, who by his mighty power at work within us is able to accomplish abundantly far more than we could ever ask for or imagine. To him be glory in the church, from generation to generation, forever. Amen." And today we celebrate those generations that have been passed on to us. Please join with me in prayer. God, this evening it is with joy and a sense of celebration that we come together. We thank you and we praise you for all that has happened at Clinton Frame, for the many lives that have been touched through this church over the years. And we recognize that this is all about you. And so we humble ourselves before you this evening as we celebrate your work and your goodness and your love and your grace that you have shown to this congregation. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And Dwayne Stutzman.
They warned me to turn that on ahead of time, and I forgot, of course. Welcome to your birthday party. I haven't seen a cake with 150 candles, but there's rumors of ice cream and pie and beards to drip your ice cream in. For now, you're stuck with some skits, some old photos, and my storytelling. I hope I'm not too serious. Most quotes will be slightly edited, and I apologize if I miss a photo or a person or a name that should be included. Occasionally, we'll ask for audience participation, raising your hand or standing, and I'd like to inform you that rubbernecking is in order. So if people raise their hand, look, see who in the world that is. I'd like to remember this evening places, people, and beliefs. And I'm trying to do 150 years in 50 minutes. That's 3 years a minute, so hang on. In the mid-19th century, numerous immigrants with Anabaptist beginnings settled in Clinton Township. These included Mennonite, Amish brethren, but not Amish Mennonite and not Mennonite brethren. Those monikers had yet to be born. After 1917, with the fall of the Russian Tsar, German Russians immigrated to America, mostly into the Great Plains, because the railroads had been established by then. They became known as General Conference, or what we used to refer to as GC, Mennonite. Amish settlers in Clinton Township mainly came from 2 locations. They came from Holmes County, Ohio, and Somerset County, Pennsylvania. And the differences from those two communities led to what is sometimes referred to as the Great Schism, and I'll be talking more about that. You realize that even in our own community today, the Amish from one district to the other aren't exactly alike, are they? Let's see a show of hands. You'll have four choices. One is Amish, one is Mennonite, one is General Conference Mennonite, and one is other than Mennonite. How many of you think that your immigrant ancestors came as Amish? Now, practice your rubberneck. How many think that your immigrants came as Mennonite? And how many came as GCs, General Conference? I see one, two. And then other than Mennonite. Whose ancestors came here other than Mennonite? Okay. So you see that most of us are from Amish heritage. The following is from the Indiana, J.C. Wenger's book, Mennonites in Indiana, Michigan. Amish began to settle in Indiana in 1841. The previous year, a group of 4 Amish men visited Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana in search for a new location or cheap land. They were impressed with Elkhart County, and in 1841, a little caravan of 8 adults and 16 children left Somerset County, Pennsylvania, for Indiana. They stopped in Holmes County for a week, and then they made their way around the Great Black Swamp, which most of us refer to as Archbold, Ohio. You'll know that there's a lot of ditches out there and a lot of good black ground, right? They spent their last night just south of White Pigeon, Michigan. On June 29, 1841, they settled 3 miles southeast of Goshen. The trip had taken 26 days. They lived a few months in small huts in what would be just west of Supreme Corporation. Preacher Joseph Miller and Deacon Joseph Borntrager each bought 80 acres in Clinton Township. The 2 other bought in Newberry Township, LaGrange County, close to what we call the Forks. There's boulders with brass plaques that mark the location of those 2 farms. One is, okay, the projector back there isn't on. I don't know, that'd help if I could see that. One is a 4th mile west of the corner, almost across from the cemetery. Jeremy Bender lives there now. The other one is a mile south of church, and it's now owned by Eldie and Deb Troyer. For many years, it was the home place of D.J. John's family. A part of that farm is still lived on by the 6th generation of the Johns family. That would be Dave and Jeanette Hathaway and their children. The first Amish service, not Mennonite, but the first Amish service was in 1842 in the home that Deb and Eldie live in now, just a mile south of here. The following year, there were 8 more families that came from Somerset County, Pennsylvania, and 8 from Holmes County, Ohio. So we have these mix coming. In the course of time, the unity of the Amish settlement was threatened by differences in practice. People from Ohio and Pennsylvania. About 1845, the church divided into an east and a west district. But 2 years later, and I like this quote, 2 years later, the schism was healed by 3 bishops, peacemakers from Ohio. However, in the spring of 1854, the Amish church divided again, and this time the schism was painful and permanent. I will be using the word progressive and conservative as I go. These words should in no way be defined by the way we use them in today's politics. The more progressive faction, led by Bishops Isaac Smucker and Jonas D. Troyer, J.D. Troyer, formed what was later known as the Amish Mennonite Church. The more conservative body became known as Old Order Amish, and they thrive in this area today. Similar difficulties developed in the Mennonite settlement, and Yellow Creek was kind of the hub of that. And out of the stress in Yellow Creek, we have what's today the Whistler Mennonites, and then the Mennonites and the Missionary Church. Daniel Brenneman, Memorial Missionary Church. Brenneman was a member of Yellow Creek at one time. Today, there's a large group of words to define Mennonites. The clarification lets follow Clinton Frame from root to bud and not worry about all the other branches of the Anabaptist tree. From the Reformation, we have Menno Simons, so we have the Mennonites. And then Jacob Amon, Amish. The Amish came to Elkhart County, came to America, Elkhart County. And from that, from a division, we became Amish Mennonite, and then we merged with Mennonite, and today we're what we call Mennonite Church USA. If you wonder which churches were Mennonite and which were Amish Mennonite, look for cemeteries. The Mennonite churches have cemeteries, had cemeteries. Shore, Clinton Brick, Yellow Creek, Olive, there's others. In fact, they still have cemeteries. They didn't go away. The Amish Mennonites, such as Forks and Clinton Frame and Maple Grove, did not have cemeteries. Now, we started one, just a few years ago. Many of you are more confused. How many of you are more confused now than you were at 6:30? Anybody? Good, I don't see any hands. How many of you are ready for ice cream already? A few honest people. Okay, let's go forward to the past. Isaac Schmucker and Jonas D. Troyer, J.D. Troyer, were chief leaders in the formation of the Amish Mennonite movement. After moving away and then returning to this area, Schmucker identified mostly with the Maple Grove congregation at the Haw Patch. Think Topeka. J.D. Troyer moved from here to Ohio and was ordained minister in 1854. Now remember, 1854 was the great schism that I talked about. Shortly after, he was ordained bishop, and one of the marked innovations that he had was performing baptism in the stream just a little south of here. He also maintained a milder discipline in the Clinton congregation. Now that's going to be an issue. Milder discipline will be a recurring theme. According to J.C. Wanger, Troyer was said to be a very gifted speaker, but strong-willed. He was a young man ordained the same year as the Great Division, which, according to the Amish historian Hans Bornträger, was noteworthy, lamentable, and complete. Bornträger states that parents were torn from children, sisters from brothers. In 1991, Russell Craybill describes it as 4 main issues: clothing, serving in worldly occupations, whatever that is, toleration of business enterprising, and schooling. It began in 1854 and was complete in 1857. Troyer was followed by Christian Plank of Ohio, Christian Miller, John Smiley, who was an Irish orphan. These ordinations were done between 1849 and 1852, and the ministers all left the Clinton Township by 1872. So clearly our people, our leaders, we were led by young ministers who frequently moved to newer and better locations. At that time, Clinton people still met in homes. The following information is from the Book of Deeds at Elkhart County Recorder's Office, and this is where we date our anniversary date. Now, I know you can't read it, but I just look at the handwriting and so on. On August 10, 1863, Michael Stutzman and his wife Elizabeth conveyed an acre of ground to church trustees John Smiley, Emanuel Hostetler, and Samuel Stutzman for the purpose of erecting a meeting house for said church. The price was $25. 2 things are interesting to me when I read that. One is that Elizabeth Stutzman and John Smiley signed there with an X because they couldn't write their name. And the name of the church was Waldense. Waldense. It's thought that Troyer wanted to identify this new church with a pre-Reformation evangelical body of Christians in Europe. After moving to Stark County from here, he also named a new church Waldense Church. The name Clinton Frame probably stuck from common usage to distinguish the wood-framed church from the brick-framed church. I'm not aware of any straw-framed churches, but the brick frame was a Mennonite church, and then the wood frame was Amish Mennonite church. So we have Clinton frame and Clinton brick, both in Clinton Township. Also in 1863, a small wood frame meeting house was built. Now, a lot of people refer to the first church as the one that's depicted in the little model in the foyer, but there was one before that. So they build a church. Building buildings builds bridges away from tradition. That was a new concept. This building was replaced in 1888 and moved near State Road 4 and County Road 33. It's now a part of an Amish home. In the 1970s, Toby Yoder brought me these doors, the ones that are right there. He brought me those doors. He said, we're remodeling, and I think somebody should have them. And I feel honored to have been somebody. Again, J.C. Winger says, a bright new chapter began at Clinton Frame in 1882 when an able school teacher named Daniel J. Johns was ordained to the ministry. He was alert. He was known for quick one-liners. He was a progressive leader in the best sense of the word, and he could also be strong-willed. Now, you notice that was a characteristic of another early leader. DJ was strong-willed. As a great-grandchild of DJ Johns, I can attest that stubborn children are sometimes referred to as showing their Johns spunk. Of course, my parents never used that on their youngest child. The following is from a biographical sketch written by Galen Johns, who was DJ's grandson. He was an eager learner. DJ thrived on his mother's homeschooling and a few months attending a local subscription school. He loved competition, spelling bees, and playing games of skill. At one time, he was invited to go to Kokomo for a checker tournament. That's 100 buggy miles. Think about it. At age 19, he began to teach school. He taught 4 years at Pasham. How many of you know where Pasham is? All right, you're amazing. I didn't believe it. Anyway, he taught, it's about 10, 12 miles from here. DJ married at the age of 24 before making a Christian commitment. After their first child was born, his wife Nancy became very ill. He was called from the field. DJ heard Nancy's plea to raise their child in the faith. He called the ministers from Clinton Church to anoint her, and he made a commitment to the Lord and to the church, and he was baptized. Nancy recovered, but she was never healthy after that, so it was a lingering issue with her. This was a major event in John's family, in the Johns family. As it turned out, it was also a major event in the life of Clinton Frame. He was made Sunday school superintendent the next year, and Sunday school was controversial at that time. 8 years later, he was ordained minister. He was bishop at 47 years. He often began sermons in English to the children and then finished in German or Dutch to the adults. As an Amish Mennonite bishop, he often worked with Mennonites. Now, there's a difference between Amish Mennonite and Mennonite, okay? He was one of 2 Amish Mennonites to help form and incorporate Elkhart Institute, which is today Goshen College. He was a prime mover in organizing Mennonite Aid Association, now part of Mutual Aid Exchange. And some of his opponents called it Johns's Spritzers, fire department, I guess. He helped organize Mennonite General Conference, a joint meeting of the Mennonites and the Amish Mennonites. And in 1917, this became Indiana-Michigan Conference. DJ helped bring together organizations to form the Mennonite Board of Missions. He served on the board for the first 13 years of what became known as Mennonite Publishing House. DJ must have had special gifts in working through difficulties because he was called to Ohio, Pennsylvania, and surrounding Indiana counties to bring peace. Issues involved hooks and eyes or buttons under the beard, one door or two door in a new church at Forks, young people's meetings in English or young people's meetings in German, or no young people's meetings. Young was under 30. And he did this without the benefit of a salary, of an automobile, a fax, email, typewriter. Anybody remember a typewriter? Didn't have a secretary, didn't even have a cell phone. Okay. Let's not forget the home at Clinton Frame. As a young minister, there were no conference regulations, no prescribed discipline among the churches. And on a Sunday of no service, ministers often visited other churches. Sometimes things came up that caused difficulty. The following story is reported by Mark Yoder in Clinton Frame Sketches. In 1884, some young converts were baptized at Forks. After the service, DJ told that Bishop J.J. Troyer and Isaac Schmucker were offended because he didn't have a beard. When J.S. Hartzler heard the talk about young preachers, he went to visit Bishop Troyer. They talked things over. Hartzler told Troyer they were sorry and they wished they'd have come to them directly instead of talking to other people. And they said, as a result, the two young ministers agreed to grow beards. So peace was made. When Bishop Troyer died, J.S. Hartzler preached his funeral sermon, went home and shaved off his beard. DJ, however, left his double beard grow. He later told his grandson Galen that his beard is like a baseball team. There's 9 on a side. When there's 3 out, they're all out. About the same time, the manner of dress of J.S. Hartzler and D.J. Johns changed. These young preachers wore lay-down coats, shirts with collars, and black neckties. One minister from the east saw D.J. in town wearing a fur coat and a fur hat. And this had to change. Older ministers told him they must wear hooks and eyes. They said if they had to wear hooks and eyes, they'd get coats like the Mennonites. Finally, a compromise was reached. They would wear the mitzvah, nicknamed the shad belly, also called the Prince Albert, and what my generation called the plain coat. I think there's a little evidence of that here tonight. Ties were out, but buttons were in. Let's remember that the division from the Amish church 35 years prior was very divisive and bitter, and there was a growing generation of young people who wanted to shed tradition, get rid of history. And at this time, the people in Clinton Frame were known to be very dressy. Sisters started to wear hats and bustles, whatever bustles are, I'm not quite sure about that. And the men had spiffy coats and black ties and gold watch chains. We got somebody here, I think.
Of 1889, at the council meeting, the majority voted to stand against this. The neighboring Amish Mennonite churches had been watching Clinton, and the ministers told Dan if he wouldn't straighten things out, then they wouldn't commune with him anymore. The ministers from the various churches visited more than they do now. Church was held every other Sunday, and on the Sunday, when there was no church at home, they would visit the other churches. Dan Johns was aware of the condition in the church. He tried to keep order and did all he could do to keep the church together. While this trouble was coming to a climax, one Sunday, as Dan was preaching,
Wir sind da zusammengekommen, der Meier, und ich will euch alle die Gnade Gottes anwünschen. Und der Meier, der ich gleich schätze, was meint, wir für Frieden haben da ohne uns in unserer Gemeinde. Und es seemt, ein Teil von uns ist nicht Frieden hin gerade alle Welt, so will ich...
Hvor sind die da, da ich gedrivene Leid? Wir können nicht mehr schaffen mit, ne? Die, was, das ist die Schwätze.
Wel, wenn du heimkommst, musst du dem nicht zu weit gucken, wenn du es finden. Fakt, du kannst vielleicht in den Spiegel gucken.
Du mens dus zo wel stil zijn, hoor iemand neemt op alles. Zo hoe kan het?
Dan went on preaching his sermon. In the fall, another vote was taken on the same question, the result being much the same as before. Again, the majority took a conservative attitude. By this time, other questions arose, namely, open communion and the wearing of the lone mustache. Finally, to bring discipline into the church, it was decided that anyone who failed to conform to the decision of the church would lose his membership. The result was two distinct sides in the church. Even through all this, Clinton Frame was a growing congregation. In 1888, a new building was erected. Now, 4 years later in 1892, the house is divided. Now the question was, which side gets the meeting house? It happened that the janitor was on the progressive side, and he refused to surrender the key. John's side, accordingly, changed the lock on the door. Then the conservatives had charge of the building. John realized it really wasn't fair to chase a minority out who had helped to build it without paying them something. Johns therefore told them he would give them $1,000, this being all the money he had saved. They accepted the offer and erected an identical building at a cost of $2,468.48, 1 mile north of the Clinton Church, called Silver Street Church. Following dedication and church meetings, they had 87 members and were debt-free. They affiliated with the General Conference Mennonites. Today, they are known as Silverwood and are on West Clinton Street in Goshen. The members who were left at Clinton raised and repaid most of the money, which Johns paid in advance to those who left Clinton. This was a serious experience for Johns. And from this time on to the end of life, he was strict on dress and other small things. For he saw where those things led to. He kept things under control and never had any serious trouble in the home church after that.
How many of you here are ordained? And how many of you think that your biographer will say, "You never had any trouble"? Oh, the hands all went down. Let's examine these two pictures. The first one is about 1891. And the second one is about 1918. Doesn't it look like they have the dates reversed? Clearly, this event altered the history at Clinton Frame. You can go from that top view to the very conservative-looking people on the bottom. Okay, Ira Johns was DJ's son. He was ordained in 1924, April 7, at the request of the District Mission Board. He was ordained with the understanding that he would be available wherever needed. However, Clinton Frame decided that they were the wherever needed place, so he served all of his ministry here at Clinton Frame. He was an active minister until retiring in 1950. He was a strong conference man. He served as Secretary of Conference for 29 years. He was much concerned with the welfare of the church. He was deeply burdened that the church would not drift into worldliness. In the 20s, there was a strong emphasis on clean living, no tobacco, no alcohol, a lot of tent meetings, revival meetings. Ira bridged the leadership from his father to that of Vernon Bontrager. I've been talking about people and beliefs, and I'd like to address places a little bit. We have purchased property 6 times from the same farm. This is our present campus, according to Google. This was in 1863 when we bought the first property. Okay, that was 1863. Both the 1863 and the 1888 buildings were on that property. And if you can see, that is basically our front yard. Okay, here's the life center, life part. So those two buildings were in our front yard for the most part. 1.5 acres were added in 1929. This provided a place for those large tents and for conferences and evangelistic meetings. That's where men drove tent stakes and ladies served meals and children enjoyed the blanket toss. How many of you remember the blanket toss? Am I the only? Oh, there's a couple more. About 8 young guys would get a blanket and grab a kid and put them in the middle, and away you'd go. And anyway, I remember it. Those areas would be approximately our front yard today. The east line of that 1929 property is now down the center of our fellowship hall. That's where the east line of that property would be. In 1964, another acre provided space for a new brick building. And that's what we call today the Life Center. In 1990, another small strip was added and where the now we had the whole walnut tree. We added a little strip down here, right there, and it's part of the south parking lot now. And there's a story behind the walnut tree, I won't tell you. In 1977, the 1977 and 1990 lots provided additional parking and space for possible future expansions. Between 95 and 98, negotiations finally closed for the purchase of 15 acres. So that gives us our present campus. Now, just recently we discovered that we own a small strip of land across the road where the buggy sheds used to be. And that would be right in here, about there. I think that's the next slide maybe. It's 36.5 feet by 300 feet. If you take the pavement and the shoulder off, you got about 16 feet left. That's what we own on the other side, according to the county. Okay? This brings a total to about 23 acres and made possible our present campus. I remember the advice, get enough to last for a while. Well, we took that get enough to last a while. We took it literal, and thanks to Alvin Yoder, we started a cemetery, so it's going to last a while. That was supposed to be a joke. If we count the new auditorium as a new building, then we are now in our 4th building. There are many additions and remodels and improvements. This model that's out in the foyer is a great depiction of the 1888 building, and it was 36 by 66 feet. It was made by Darren Miller while he was in high school at Bethany. Is Darren here? There. I think that's such a wonderful addition to our memorial room. It just gives a sense of what that little church was like. I think so. It had 2 coal stoves in the meeting area. Actually, that's all it was a meeting area. There was no basement, no entrance stoop, a well with a tin cup, and the outhouses were behind the church. That'd be pretty close to where the junior NYF meets, so you might want to think about that. Agitation for more space began in 1910. This culminated in the digging of a Michigan-style basement and the installing a furnace in 1913. Kerosene lamps gave way to electric lights in 1916. In 1935, we put a balcony for additional seating. Curtains with wires provided visual barrier, but not much vocal distractions. It also provided a railing on which to hang the black round clock that's out there in the foyer. And by the way, it was visible only to the minister and the amen corner. Everybody else would have had to turn around to see it, and that wouldn't have been polite during the sermon, would it? In March of 1951, the basement was improved. Classrooms were built around the central gathering room used for Sunday school and sewing circle. An emergency exit was put to serve both floors. A water fountain was installed, and best of all, indoor restrooms with stalls and porcelain and water. You know what porcelain is, right? Okay. Many of you and your families have memories from the little white church. This is a wedding picture, and it reminds us how the interior looked. Note the amen corners and the picture hanging on the wall. That picture is now in our prayer room. I'd like to bring back some of your memories, and a lot of you will identify with this, I think. Some of your memories by sharing a letter that I got from Margaret Kaufman. I was carried to Clinton Frame as an infant and didn't miss a lot of Sundays. My first memories began when I was old enough to go to Sunday school class. We sat on little red chairs in the basement. Classes were divided by thin blue curtains strung on wires. Minnie Byler was my first Sunday school teacher. Minnie loved music, and she taught us choruses. One favorite was, "Let the Merry Sunshine In." And I think that's interesting because the basement was quite dark with small little windows. Each Sunday she used a large flip chart with a Bible story picture, and we were given individual matching cards to take home. As I grew older, I remember a teacher who had us memorize Bible verses that began with the letter of our first name. When we grew up, we went to the balcony for Sunday school, but we still had the tiny, thin blue curtains. After Sunday school, the little children sat with their parents during the worship service. I liked to sit with Daddy on the men's side. He was equipped with a pencil and paper so we could draw and write during the sermon. Then I graduated to sit up front with the big girls. Grandma John sat in the amen corner next to us, and we knew she could keep a watch on us out of the corner of her eye. But kneeling prayer time gave the girls opportunity to whisper and share things from their purses. It was at a revival meeting at Clinton Frame that I publicly made a commitment to serve Christ, and I felt support from my church family when I left for short periods to teach Bible school or summer school and that sort of thing. I felt loved by my great-grandpa, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, who were also a part of Clinton Frame. Young People's Meeting each Sunday evening gave youth opportunity for learning to give talks and lead singing. I enjoyed learning to sing choruses. I have pleasant memories as I recall singing in a trio with Doris and Ruth. My favorite song leaders were Leland Byler, George Blau, and Lulu Stutzman. I remember we often had company for dinner. Sunday was a special day to share with special people. Hosting the Indiana-Michigan Conference was exciting. There was a big tent, and water was piped to a little trough outside where we could get a drink from a tin cup. Everybody used the same cup, all right? I remember the buggy sheds that remained across the road where Fred Byler parked his old car. This sign was assembled by Niles Kaufman from the actual siding boards from the 1888 church. It has a story of its own, and I'm not going to tell it all. When the siding boards were taken down from storage to assemble, the word Amish was discovered under the white. With advice from Jan Gleistein, and one coat of paint was removed. Soon after 1916, when the Amish Mennonites merged with the Mennonites to form the Indiana-Michigan Mennonite Conference, not the Indiana-Michigan Amish Mennonite Conference. Legend has it that the following week, a member of the church, without permission, took his ladder, paint, brush, went up on the roof, painted over the word Amish. And so we are now Clinton Frame Mennonite Church. 1964. Joe C. Miller, Morris Garber, George Blau, Sanford H. Daniel Miller were commissioned as building committee. Harshberger Brothers were contractors. After 1964, Clinton Frame was a brick church. Should we still be called Clinton Frame? After 1964, men and women no longer sat on separate sides of the aisle. The new 50 by 90 foot auditorium And there you see they're erecting those old beams. It could have fit over the top of the whole old church. Except for the podium, there were no steps. There were padded benches to seat 408 people. There were mothers' rooms. There were restrooms. There were windows to the podium from the mothers' rooms. Classrooms were surrounded the auditorium. A new concept arrived, a fellowship hall. Yeah, look at all those tables tightly packed together. Oh, a fellowship hall. I remember the building committee looking at the foundation when that church was built, and they said, that fellowship hall isn't big enough. So they had the contractor dig another section of foundation. And there's still a crack in the cement where the first foundation was, but it's been hidden under the carpeting in the children's rooms over there. Many people volunteered in the building process. Niles Kaufman made a cross from wood that had been stick-dried among the rafters of his shop. Men sanded and installed the 4-by-4-inch roof deck, put on shingles, installed doors and trim. Ladies painted, served food, cleaned windows, painted, cleaned walls, served food, painted. On August 18th, 1964, after a short service in the old church, everyone walked to the new auditorium carrying their hymnals for the conclusion of the service. Verlin and Karen Garber Troyer had the first wedding in that new church. On April 24 of 65, my mom said that the Stutzman men are weepy, so I'll get over it. Just let me a little time. 1965, there was an auction of material for the old church. Some items, such as Jesus in the garden picture, the attendance board, the clock, the podium chairs, and so forth, were auctioned off. The benches in the pulpit went to People's Bible Church in Benton. Years later, families gave Benton a new pulpit and table in exchange for the old one. So we got this one back. For a long time, it was at People's Bible Church in Benton. Some of the lumber was salvaged and sold. But on Saturday, April 3rd, 1965, the old church was taken down. It was cut into sections below and above the windows. And it was pulled over into a pit and burned. And that would be about where the north drive of our present campus is. I remember Silas Smoker asked me, he tapped me on the shoulder, he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "We're burning the church." He didn't like it very well. Thanks to him, the doors that are in the foyer that you walked through when you came in, those doors and the siding of this sign were stored in a neighbor's barn for about 35 years. In 1986, the 64 structure was enlarged and steps taken to save energy. 6 classrooms were added. Mothers' rooms were relocated and enlarged. The foyer was made 2.5 times bigger, and the main entrance was put in the middle. Okay, so after 100 years, we're still deciding whether we have 2 doors to the main entrance or whether we have 1. Yeah. A balcony was put in, and the capacity increased to 518. Other amenities included new carpet, carport, carpeted halls, classrooms, handicapped restrooms, and a steeple. Dave and Cindy Bontrager Hawkins kept things on schedule. After all, there was a wedding scheduled. Big sister Julie and a guy named Terry kept things on track. Sorry, Terry, just couldn't resist it. In 1950, Vernon Bontrager was ordained minister after being called by lot. D.J. Johns had been ordained in 1882, Ira Johns in 1924, Vernon in 19 50. And when he retired in 1990, it made 108 years of ministerial service, 108 years at Clinton Frame. That's truly different than the leadership that we had in the early days, where the leaders were young and they kept moving away, going somewhere else. A young minister, yeah, there he is.
The Amish boy was perhaps 12 years old when he first came to Bible school at Clinton Frame. Is he coming out? You want to go up there and get him?
He's bashful.
Yeah. The Amish boy was perhaps 12 years old when he first came to Bible school at Clinton Frame. Isn't that somewhat strange? Even dangerous? An Amish boy in a Mennonite church. No, Vernon Bontrager's parents were understanding, accepting, and interested in their son's biblical education. So in spite of having 2 Amish bishops as grandfathers, Vernon was allowed to attend Bible school. Also attending Bible school at Clinton Frame was a young girl by the name of Miriam Hoover, who caught the attention of this young boy. She carried a Bible both in hand and in her heart. Naturally, Vernon was smitten, in spite of the gulf between them. Miriam must have been smitten a bit also. Later, as was the custom in the Amish culture, Vernon stopped his education at 8th grade and went to work at a flour mill. But Vernon managed to see Miriam as she would pass by on the school bus. They would exchange waves and smiles. Miriam then headed off to Eastern Mennonite High School in Virginia for her senior year of schooling. Life at the flour mill was a little bit more dull for Vernon. But Miriam and Vernon stayed in touch. And the long school year ended. By this time, Vernon had stood at a revival meeting held at Middlebury Mennonite Church, making a public acknowledgement to follow Christ. Not only did he make a spiritual change, he also made a lifestyle change and became English. The great gulf between them was now narrowing. After some serious dating, their love continued to grow, and on June 1st, 1945, Vernon and Miriam were married. This was a great big step for Miriam. She didn't know what life with Vernon would bring. It brought forth 6 sons and 40 years of being a pastor's wife.
Where's Vernon and Miriam? I'm losing track of them. Yeah, he's got that sneaky little grin. Vernon and Miriam ministered at Clinton Frame 40 years. When ordained at age 25, he had a little education. After preaching his first sermon, he told his wife, Miriam, "I preached everything I know. I think about 2 years is as long as they'll put up with me. He was wrong, really wrong. During his tenure, there was an emphasis on missions. Many mission-minded programs originated at Clinton Frame in the 50s and the 60s. In 1949, 40 persons and Pastor Galen Johns became Benton Mennonite. Numerous church plantings in the Upper Peninsula and had Clinton Frame connections, among them Sioux Hill, Brutus, Petoskey, and Middlebury in Indiana. In 52, men from the Clinton Frame scouted Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky for a location for a Bible school and a church planting. They landed in Talcum, Kentucky. Many of you remember teaching Bible school, constructing buildings, babysitting, canning food, riding up the creek in a panel truck, and running on those swinging bridges. Let's go to the next slide, the swinging bridge. I remember those things. They were bad. I personally learned how to snipe hunt in Kentucky. And the person that's taught me is here tonight. Don Hostetler. Sam and Dorothy Hostetler, John and Dima Mishler, Orlo and Dorothy Fisher served as pastors. Are any of those people here? Any of their children here? I know Don is. Oh, don't be so bashful. Okay. How many of you, raise your hand if you did volunteer work in Talcum, Kentucky. You taught Bible school, you helped build the church, you helped with the house construction. Let's see them. Okay. Get your rubbernecks on. There's a lot of people here that helped in Kentucky. All right. In 1962, the Caroliers began singing and continued for 40 years. They made 2 records. Yep, records, not tapes, not discs, not on digital, records. As was typical of their time, on their record jacket, they're identified only by their husband's name. I found that very interesting, but I think that was typical. Do I hear echoes?
Somebody did a golden deed, proving himself a friend in need. Somebody sang a cheerful song, brightening the sky the whole day long. Was that somebody you? Was that somebody you?
For a shorter length of time, there were the Messenger's Men. They also gave programs and made records. Both groups made service trips to Talcum and other mission locations. And I think we have them singing a little bit too.
God sent his Son, they called him Jesus. He came to love, heal, and forgive. He lived and died to buy my pardon. An empty grave is there to prove my Savior lives. How sweet to hold a new.
That's typical of the a cappella music of the time. You notice that neither of those groups had instruments. In the 50s and 60s, about 20 men from Clinton Frame had connections to Clinton Frame, were ordained for service, many for small church plants. In 1951, Norman Coughlin was ordained deacon. In 61, Fred Slabaugh was ordained deacon. And he served until church reorganization changed to the use of elders and more lay leaders. Please raise your hand if you were ordained in any Mennonite church in the 50s or 60s. Who was ordained in the 50s or 60s? There's not very many here. Okay. The congregation learned to fellowship in the new fellowship hall. Literaries became MYF. Youth were recognized with MYF, JOY, Torchbearers, Bible Memory, Amigo Center, or Camp Amigo we called it. Our members provided leadership in starting Clinton Christian School, Bethany Christian School. MYF and others provided monthly programs at Hope Rescue Mission. Fresh Air Children arrived from Chicago. Lay leaders were utilized with the creation of church council, and we finally had a budget. In the 70s and 80s, worship teams and instruments enriched our four-part harmony music. In 1971, the first organ was purchased. 1978, Irv Bontrager and his guitar taught us how to sing choruses off the wall, we called it. Since 1972, who can say bus ministry without thinking of Aldine and Esther Thomas? Yep, Aldine. He never preached a sermon. He was never ordained. But what a legacy of lay ministry. What a legacy. Raise your hand if you helped in any way in the bus ministry or children's church or related activities. Now, Aldine's sitting over here in the corner. Come on. In 1973, we selected our first elders, all male. Later on, we had ladies that served. In 1980, caring ministry leaders were appointed at first for 5 Sunday school classes. They were lay leaders organized for pastoral care assistance. I believe that the caring ministry leaders, that program makes Clinton Frame. I say that it was Vernon's idea, his concept. He says he copied it from a preacher west of town. From 1950 to 1990, Reverend Bontrager preached 1,286 sermons at Clinton Frame, 126 at other churches, 46 series of evangelistic meetings. He married 186 couples. He conducted 122 funerals. He baptized 287. He received 488 new members by letter. Clearly, he knew more than he thought he did when he was ordained. Raise your hand if you were baptized or married by Vernon Bontrager. Look around, Vernon. Come on, turn your head. How many of you had Vernon preach at your funeral? It's also clear that he gives much credit to his wife, Miriam. She raised 6 sons. She kept the chickens fed. She boarded students from Bethany while Vernon was often called away for conferences and evangelistic meetings. And she kept detailed church records, membership lists. She mimeographed the bulletins. It's no coincidence that our first church secretary, Bonnie Lowe, was hired when Vernon retired. Miriam, thank you. Thank you. In 1990, John Yoder came out of retirement and began 2 years as an interim pastor. He taught us that there was life after Vernon Bontrager. Yeah, sermons, visitations, weddings, and funerals, they were still possible. And he provided a necessary bridge. In 1992, Bob Schreiner became lead pastor. He joined the congregation from Blooming Glen, Pennsylvania. He broadened our presence beyond Clinton Township. He led the church to examine our past and decipher what we should become. He was instrumental in developing the enthusiasm for this present physical facilities that we have. In 1999, the present campus was completed and dedicated. This is how our 3 auditoriums have looked. I don't have any picture of the original 1863 church, but we have the 1888 building, the 1964 auditorium, and the one we have that we're in now. I have collected a few wedding pictures. I tried to get one from each decade, and my purpose in showing these is for you to just see how we have changed in the way number of people we have in our weddings and the way we dress, and just a little, just of interest. I like the way their glasses are alike. Why are you laughing at that one? Today, our pastoral team is led by Terry Diener, along with Linda Miller, Mel Shetler, John Troyer, Sheila Troyer, Anita Miller, Danny Yoder, and Dwayne Bontrager. Today we are again examining our mission and evaluating possible improvements to our campus. Today, as a community of faith, our commitment is to worship the God of glory, equip individuals for ministry, and proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ. Now I'd like for you to help me with some trivia. And just respond if you would, please. Who of you were carried to Clinton Frame as an infant? That would include myself. Now remember, rubbernecking is in order. Whose parents always attended Clinton Frame? It was the only place they had membership. Whose grandparents attended Clinton Frame? Whose great-grandparents attended Clinton Frame? Whose great-great-grandparents attended Clinton Frame? Now, look around a little bit. There's not many of us left. Now, actually, if we had some more young children, we might have more that would... Okay, thank you. Raise your hand if you attended Clinton Frame, if you have been a member, a regular attendee of Clinton Frame for more than 50 years. Wow, I didn't know some of you were that old. More than 60 years. More than 70 years. Marcel, myself, or I don't have my long-range glasses on. Okay, Lowell, Moss, Bob Moss. Ed Miller? Ned. He's the guy that stabbed me with a fork one time. All right, I apologize for not seeing. Who else? Clear in the back, and I can't tell who you are. Wilbur. No. Doris Stutzman. See, I shouldn't have started this. Okay, Elva Weissong is over here. Dean Yoder. All right, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have started naming names. I got in trouble, didn't I? Now, some of you, this will be repeat. Who's attended here more than 70 years? I'm sorry, more than 80 years. Anybody? There we go. Bob Moss. Elva would be, right? Elva Wysong. And I'm not even going to ask 90. And again, I apologize if I omitted a name or something that I should, I know that's going to happen. As in thinking, I thought that probably Annabelle Bontrager, Elva Wysong, Esther Grover, Doris Stutzman, Bob Moss, and Lillian Slayball would probably be the ones that have attended here the longest. And again, if I missed somebody, I'm sorry. Now, who of you are the first member of your family to attend Clinton Frame? You're the first one in your family that attended Clinton Frame. There we go. Now, you're the people that made the church. Let's give those people credit too, yeah? Okay, I'm going to speed up here a little bit. Raise your hand if you're a part of these, I call them historic names, names that appear on some of the older Sunday school records or whatever. How many of you have Most in your blood somewhere? Most. Garber. Whirlage. Reedsecker? Slaybaugh? Aish? I didn't know that. Schmucker? Schmucker, Smoker, any of those. Troyer? Bontrager, Borntrager. Stutzman? Kaufman? And Johns. Okay. Thank you. Vernon preached his last sermon on October 14th, 1990, based on John 17. And I'd like to end with a small quote from that sermon. Quote, I'm thinking about something that I learned as a young man from Ira Johns when he said, when making decisions, we may have differing ideas, but he said, once the decision is made, even if it isn't the way we thought, then we go with the other side. If we all do that, we will have unity. Perhaps in 2013, we can still learn from the events of 1892. To God be glory. Thank you. Just a little housekeeping. Tomorrow morning at 9:30 the service, as you enter, the men will sit on the left and the women on the right. This is to relive a little tradition. Unlike past tradition, there will be nursery care for the infants to grade 3. And from age 4 to grade 2, we'll have a Clinton Frame birthday party in the Life Center. And grade 3 and above will sit with mother on the right or father on the left. Child's choice. I just made that up. As we dismiss, you still have time to contribute to the beard contest. The money from your vote will go to our sharing fund here at Clinton Frame. And yes, I do have a beard. If you got good eyesight, there's one there. As we dismiss, everyone's invited to pie and ice cream in the fellowship hall. There'll be an open mic, and it's available for anyone that, if we stirred up memories that you want to share, that's what the open mic is for. So, and you're welcome to stay as long as you want and, enjoy each other's people's company that you haven't seen for a while. What did I forget? There's something I forgot. I guess that's it. So, you're dismissed. Please enjoy.